Okay, let's take a look at the spine. We discussed this a little bit in class on Monday, but as you go through this week and the next, it's good to return to the material. For the most part, this is what will be on the quiz. There may be additional questions on there in an attempt to get you to kind of search for answers on your own as maybe a way to study or get some practice with the spine. But here we go. So, some general questions to ask yourself ahead of the quiz. We're going to go through each of these. Each one is about a slide. So, let's start with identify the inferior vertebral notch on a vertebrae. So, I brought up an L spine for us to take a look at this because it's easiest seen on an L spine. Since it's the biggest, blockiest, has uh, the it's kind of the epitome of all of the different things you could label for any of the spine. So if we're looking for the inferior vertebral notch, let me bring up my drawing tool. And we have that right here. If we look at an X-ray as opposed to an illustration for this notch right here, this picture right here is going to help us determine where that is. So here's our lateral L-spine X-ray that you will work on, challenge on, start to do next semester. This is what it's going to look like. It's a good image of that. Now, the inferior vertebral notch, this one's outlined here. If I were to outline another one, I would let's take a look at L1. The superior notch is up here. The inferior notch is down here. When they join up and the whole spine is connected, what you get is an intervertebral foramen right here, made up of the superior notch of one vertebrae and, the inferior notch of one vertebrae and the superior notch of another vertebrae, and they make up that kind of hole that you can see through on an X-ray. The other parts of this that are common to other vertebrae, like the T-spine, for example, and most of the C-spine, but not C1, is going to be the spinous process here, here. We have a transverse process, not easily seen on the lateral. And in this illustration, it's good, but you won't really see that until we see an AP view. For example, let me clear these. If we're talking about transverse process, for example, you can see it on APs, and in the C-spine, it's right here. Let me bring up that tool again. Right there, and so on, right here, and so on. Transverse process. All right, back to this one. So that answers that first question to kind of ask yourself, could you identify that either on an illustration or an X-ray? And I would go ahead and use these pictures. Okay, we talked about in class that you can't really see the Z joints on this X-ray, but that the Z joints are made up of the superior articular process, which is here on an L-spine vertebrae, and the inferior articular process. So if we imagine, we have this vertebrae, say we have a vertebrae above it, there's the body of it, here's our little disc space, whoops. Anyway, this one's going to have an inferior articular process that's going to meet up with the superior articular process of this one. They're going to meet up there, form their own joint before you have a spinous process. It has a superior articular process, and then so on. Then I would draw another one. It has an inferior, and so on. Not the greatest pictures, but hopefully you get the idea there. Okay. Next question to ask ourselves, which vertebrae has no body? We talked about this for a little while in class. Remember that C1 or Atlas does not have a body. It's the only one that doesn't. What it has instead is an anterior arch, which is here around the dens, and then a posterior arch. There's also a little tubercle there on the back, but remember, there's no body. There's just anterior and posterior arches. And in the meantime, look, there's another thing we've seen before, transverse process there, and there's a transverse foramen in there. It has articular facets on top and bottom as well. It's connecting to stuff as well. Here we go. Let's see what else we want to point out. C2, though, the axis that we see here has a body and it's right there. The dens, this is what we saw right here, being surrounded by the anterior arch of C1. Let's see, C2 does have that spinous process, but remember, if you ever see a spinous process that's split into two, you're looking at the C spine. That's the only place in the spine that does that. Okay, so let's continue on. Let me clear all my drawings. Okay. The next question to ask ourselves, which anatomy is best visualized on an APT spine? So we already established that we can usually see transverse processes on APs, which is true for the T-spine as well. The T-spine is kind of a trick though, because wherever you see a a rib, that's around where the transverse process will be, because the rib is kind of anchored to the transverse process and the vertebrae. So for example, on this rib right here, we see the transverse process here. We can also see that it's connecting to the vertebrae here, and it looks like it connects to two vertebrae at the same time. That means it's going to have demifacets with this vertebrae and this one. I keep calling them the vertebrae, so let's go ahead and count them, and then we can decide exactly what number we're working with. So I see a rib coming off right here. That means this is going to be T1, T2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So this, let me count the ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so the ninth rib has a demifacet with T8 and T9 here, meaning it kind of connects to both of them. And then here would be the transverse process of T9. This little circle here that we keep seeing, that would be the pedicle there and so on. It starts to look a little different, but all right, so this would be T9. Okay, 10, 11, 12. That works out because this is the last rib we can see, 12th rib, before we've transitioned to the L spine, and this would be L1 right here. Let me clear my drawings again. Okay, so we answered that question on a APT spine, transverse processes, definitely the body of the vertebrae. We can see, let's see what else. Kind of see the pedicle there if we had to point that out. We can see the spinous processes, but not in profile. They're all superimposed, and they're the teardrop places right here, here, and so on that we see in the back. Next question. Can we identify these things? We've been going over them. So let's kind of take a look. Spinous, transverse, Z joints, and so on. So let's just take a look at this one first. So we definitely on a lateral can see the spinous processes in profile now. That's going to be pretty standard for all laterals. Here's the spinous process of C2. There's C3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which is the vertebra prominence that we've been using we put our thumb there and then extend our pinky down when we're doing chest x-rays, for example. So the thumb would be pressed down right here, and then the hand goes down to line up for a chest x-ray. So we have seen that before. Remember, there is no spinous process for C1 right below the skull. C1 only has a posterior arch and an anterior arch, and it's superimposed over the dens of C2 right here. And then it has the dens coming up, or odontoid process. Let's see, Z joints. Remember, and we were talking about it here. Remember how I was talking about the superior articular process joins up with the inferior articular process and so on. Those joints make up Z joints. And it just so happens that on a C-spine, we see them on the lateral. You'll learn about that next semester, though, and how it changes. For example, right, real fast, you cannot see Z joints on a lateral L spine, but you can on a lateral C spine. And you'll learn more about that and pay more attention to it in positioning next semester. But for now, we're just trying to label. So anywhere we see that kind of joint between superior and inferior articular facets. That's a Z joint. That's what I'm highlighting right now. Zygapophyseal joints. Bodies here. Let's see. Pedicles kind of coming off. Remember, on average, a pedicle pretty much joins the body of a vertebrae to processes. The process that it gets joined with varies, but in this case, for example, the body is connected to the transverse process at the pedicle. And then the lamina connects the spinous process to everything else. That pretty much stays the same. So for example, here's the lamina on this C-spine vertebrae, connects spinous process to everything else. Right here, the lamina should have been labeled about right here, connects the spinous process to everything else. Okay, can we identify the Scotty dog? Let's take a look. So here's this x-ray, and there's our Z joint. Wherever there's a superior articular process and an inferior, we're going to see a Z joint. So remember how we couldn't see it on an L spine here? All we had to do was oblique our patient, and now we can see our Z joints. On the x-ray, it's here, whoops, here, and so on. Now, the Scotty dog looks, to some people, it looks like a bunny. To some people, it looks like a dog. But basically, the gist is that the ear, right, looks kind of like the ear of the dog, is going to be superior articular process. And that would be labeled as E over here. F is the joint itself. It's trying to show you. A would be the nose or the transverse process. It's coming out here, and it labels it here for you. The pedicle is the eye. Remember, that pedicle is the part that connects the body to everything else. And on our Scotty dog, we see it there as an eye. So that would be B. On the vertebrae below, this would have been the eye. On the one above, this is the eye. So, it looks a little bit different as you go down, but it's the eye. Pars interarticularis, interarticular, it's just in between these two articular processes. Just the point in between, it ends up being the neck of the Scotty dog, which would be C in this image. If we look down at the unlabeled one, this would be the neck. Up here, this would be the neck, right? Okay, and then finally D, the inferior articular process or leg. If we look down at the unlabeled one, it'd be this, and this one it's labeled as a D. Okay. And finally, let's see here. Can we identify the pedicle in an AP L spine x-ray? So we saw it as the eye of the Scotty dog here. You can see it on an AP too, though. It is labeled, yeah, it's labeled in here. So sometimes, and we saw it on the C-spine too, I'll bring that up in a second. Sometimes you can see it as kind of a darker spot, a darker round spot on AP x-rays. It's all superimposed, right, like this, but the pedicle is there and it would be in this general area. Remember, it's connecting things. Let me see here. Let me clear these out. And we'll go back to that T-spine. And you can see here pretty well where the pedicles are. Again, bring this up, there you go. Here, and so on. All right, so I hope that helps. Remember, this upcoming quiz is meant to help you study, question yourself, get you to go back and look for information and review the spine on your own. Because remember, we do not have class on Monday, the 10th. All right, thank you.